Hi, and welcome to your Poetry Notes, Part 1. Just as a little reminder or a point of information, a great working definition of poetry is a literary work where special intensity is given to the expression of emotions, typically through structure and rhyme, rhythm, style, all of those elements. We don't often acknowledge it, but the truth is, if I'm trying to convey anger or love or sadness, most likely I'm not going to be able to do that as effectively through a short story or a novel as I could do through a well scripted and structured poem. So, poetry definitely has its place in literature as a means of communication. Now, there are lots of different ways that poets write verse. For the purposes of our class, I'm only going to have you accountable for three. Those are narrative, lyric, and verse. All right? Narrative verse is when a story is told in the form of a poem. We see this in epics, we see this in romances, we see this in histories. You might be familiar with the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Odyssey, the Iliad. These are all told in narrative verse. Perhaps you would know of The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. That would be a history. Or a very famous narrative poem is called The Highwayman, which is also a great read if you have not read it. So that's narrative verse telling a story. Lyric verse, right, is simply written to stir emotion. Some examples of this might be an elegy or an ode, a sonnet. We read A Red, Red Rose. That would be the lyric verse. It is not telling a story. It is simply talking about an emotion, an idea, a thought that the poet is passing along through his poem. And finally is free verse. The only real rules in free verse are that there are no rules. There is no set rhythm. There is no set rhyme. In fact, I think what I wrote, yes, there's no set rhyme or pattern for free verse. These can be super fun to read and at times super challenging because we aren't, if we can't identify the structure right away, sometimes it's hard for our brains to fall into a rhythm at all. So those are the three types of verse. Then the second thing I'd like to look at is figurative language. Now, figurative language is found far beyond poems. It can be found in short stories, it can be found in novels, movies. So this is a great section of notes for you to have as we prepare to read Romeo and Juliet and other novels coming throughout the year. We've already been talking about some of them, so hopefully these are familiar to you. So the first one is imagery. Imagery is the use of words that appeal to our senses. Right? My best example of this, if you remember in class when I was discussing Thank You Ma'am, and I told you how much I love the author's description of the old woman and the young man and how that little throwdown on the sidewalk went. The reason I loved it was because the author had such excellent imagery. I could see the woman, I could hear her talking to him, and I could see the boy's face, and the whole exchange was just easy. It fit well in my head and in my sound. So those would be two senses that author tapped in that moment. So imagery is any time we can connect with actually happened and make the reader feel like they're really a part of it. One way that we can get imagery is through the use of metaphor. A metaphor is a comparison where one thing is described in terms of another. We have talked about this in class. So this would just simply be, I want to relay to you that my daughter was crabby. So I could say my daughter is crabby, or I could simply say my daughter is a bear this morning. Right? It just kind of adds an extra element. It relates her emotional state to that of something we are familiar with, which would be a bear. I could also say to you, though, my daughter is a gem. And that says something entirely different, but it relates the qualities of a gem that we all know and love to the personality of my daughter. The next type of figurative language is a simile. And a simile is a comparison using like or as. I'm hoping this is familiar to you. We compare something we want you to know about with something we know you already know about. For example, I'm as busy as a bee. I'm as happy as a clam. Those are all similes where we say like or as. She swam like a fish. All right, so we take something that you know and we relate it to what we're trying to convey. Personification is the next one, and that is when we give human qualities to non-human things. All right, and this one is fun to play with. I could tell you that the tree in my front yard stood bravely against the wind. So trees can't stand, and nor can they be brave. But when you picture that image in your head, it's very different from the tree drooped weakly against the wind. So those images are human beings are weak or brave, and so when we give human characteristics to something that's not a human, that is called personification. And like I said, that one's kind of fun to play around with. And finally, the last word that we're looking at is symbolism. All right, and symbolism is when we're using words which have meaning in themselves, but also represent something beyond themselves. A great example of this would be in The Outsiders. I had you make a list of everything that you could find that was referenced to be yellow or gold. So Soda Pop's hair is described as being yellow and golden. So in and of itself, Soda Pop's hair has meaning. It is yellow, and it can be great that you know that. But because it's yellow, it can be a symbol of the good things in Ponyboy's life, things that mean things that make him feel good, memories he has that are sweet to him, and Soda Pop falls under that category. So we'll be talking about our poems coming up, and also in Romeo and Juliet and our future reads, we're going to be using these words to check out how the author is writing and what he or she wants to convey to us. For your homework, one part of it that I would like for you to do is I would like for you to come to class next week, which would be on October 7th, and I would like for you to have with you a list of 2 metaphors, 2 similes, 2 examples of personification, and 2 examples of symbols from something you have either read or watched recently that you can think of. And these are, don't think too hard on these. You can steal from stuff we've read in class, but you can also go rogue. I've never read, I confess to you, The Lord of the Rings, but I have heard that the ring is a symbol. So you could use that. So think about things you're curious or that you're interested in, and see if you can't make some connections. So come up with 2 metaphors on your own, 2 similes, 2 examples of personification, and 2 examples of symbolism. Write those down on a sheet of paper and come to class prepared to share those.